And welcome back to Game Escape, here today to review Taito Legends 2 for the PlayStation 2, a compilation disc of some of the later Taito arcade titles. And I'm not a big fan of compilation discs necessarily. I'd like to, of course, play the original hardware, but in the case of arcade games, that's a little bit difficult. And Taito is really one of those companies that was on the periphery of arcade gaming, at least here in the States, when I was a kid, although, of course, video game historians out there will know that they are the company behind Space Invaders, which really created the arcade boom in the late 70s in Japan, and then subsequently in the United States. There's about 35 games on the disc, and I'm just going to take a look at a couple that stood out to me. And the first one we're looking at is Violence Fight, an arcade title from 1989, and I've never actually seen this out in the arcades, either today in the retro arcades I go to or back in the day. But it's an interesting game. It stood out to me because it seemed to occupy a middle ground between the original Street Fighter and the Art of Fighting. It reminded me of the original Street Fighter because it is kind of very simple. There's not a lot of moves, but it's introducing this one-on-one fighter that back in '89 was an innovative concept. It's pretty hard. There's again, it's just basically a game where you have to smash the punch and kick buttons. If you hold them together, you can kind of crouch down. Jumps will then initiate special moves. So it's a little bit more intricate than the original Street Fighter, but they also went with, that Art of Fighting. Well, I can't say they went with the Art of Fighting art style because this came before the Art of Fighting, but again, it has that sort of large character sprite model that made the Art of Fighting so interesting, and also kind of simulates moving around in this arena, and it's only ever one arena in kind of sort of a simulated 360-degree pattern. So definitely an interesting game. Not necessarily fun to play. It'll occupy you for about 10 minutes. And then you can move on to something else. Now, a game that is really fun to play is Doku Don, also from 1989. And this reminds me of kind of a riff on Donkey Kong. You have this character with a hammer. You're basically taking out little mushrooms and elves and other sort of enemies that you run into throughout the many levels of this game. Just a simple concept, really catchy music, really bright and fun graphics, and this is actually one that I do kind of remember in an arcade somewhere. This one was not foreign to me. I can't remember exactly when I played it, but it's got a good deal of challenge. You have to sort of memorize the patterns, collect the fruit that the enemies drop to earn your extra points, and it's just one of those games on this collection. I just sort of found myself playing and playing and playing and just going through the game. My skill, as you can see here, is not tremendous. I'm just sort of exploring the levels at this point when I recorded it. Got it. I picked up this game maybe 4 or 5 months ago. A little bit less than that, maybe 3 months ago now, and just played it a few times before doing this recording, but I just, as I moved through the game and got better and better, I did not want to stop playing. So Doku Don, definitely one of the highlights of this compilation. One of the reasons why Taito Legends 2 is becoming one of the more sought-after compilations on the PlayStation 2 is that it includes a lot of Taito's excellent shmup games from the late 80s into the early 90s, and this one is Gun Frontier, which kind of reminded me of Raiden. Very, very difficult. As you can see here, I'm having some issues with the game. Actually playing it on my X-Arcade dual joystick, which I reviewed earlier here on the channel, and over time I've actually found that the joystick itself is getting a little stuck in certain positions, so I don't really have the accuracy that I would like, but there's just something about playing an arcade compilation on an arcade stick. So I've just kind of stuck with it here for the purposes of this review. And Gun Frontier, like I said, it's not necessarily a great game. It's not the best, certainly not the best shmup here on this collection. And I think ultimately fans of Raiden will gravitate towards that series. But it's Taito's take, I think, on that style of shooter, which is not really... I've always thought of Raiden and similar games as not really shmups, but very, very positional shooters, where you just have to find the right area on the screen to best deal with the enemy patterns. And that's basically what this game is. Still, a lot of fun, definitely worth checking out. Next up we have Growl from 1991, and you can kind of see a pattern emerging here. This is Taito taking the beat-em-up genre, I think somewhat influenced by Final Fight, and putting their own spin on it, in this case really going over the top. This game is about basically a guy that hunts evil poachers, but unlike Final Fight, the screen scrolls up and down. You have a lot of the brutal violence, you have all sorts of weapons, and the attacks are just so quick. So, you'll have tons of guys on the screen, but you can really dispatch them very easily, and you can see just the rapidity of the shots that you can fire at them, and again, grabbing all sorts of weapons. Not a lot of special moves like Final Fight or Streets of Rage, but, it has that, I think, brutality and that violence that you didn't see, at least I didn't see it prior to the late 80s, early 90s in the arcade, and this was just, I think, really well done, really fun, good music, and definitely one of the games that I spent the most time with here on the compilation. Next up is Dungeon Magic, an arcade game from 1993, and here we have another example of Taito, I think, coming in the middle, or close to the middle of two very popular games. This is a role-playing, ostensibly a role-playing action RPG beat-em-up game, very much in the vein of something like Capcom's Dungeons & Dragons game, but it is not really as well executed. In fact, it's not even in the same ballpark. And you have this kind of isometric view that we saw in Growl. I think it's also drawing on Neo Geo's Sengoku, which came out 2 years earlier, and it's just not really succeeding in coming close to either of those games. It's a little bit bland, very repetitive. You sort of go through the game. You can get extra weapons. I couldn't figure out how to actually draw the sword on my fighter's back. He seems to have like this gauntlet that you can charge up, and that's his special attack. So I don't know if I have to gain more experience to get the sword, but I think the calling card of this game is that it looks nice. It looks really impressive, very, very colorful. I know I didn't see this in the arcade, but I definitely would have been attracted to it at the time had I seen it. This is just not up to the same level of quality as some of the other games. I mean, it has, you can see here, branching paths and stuff like that, but if you're looking for this style of game, again, Sengoku or the Dungeons & Dragons games from Capcom, so much better than this offering. Okay, now we have one of the true gems on this compilation disc, and that is Gary Kindon from 1995, an absolutely gorgeous vertical shoot-'em-up game. Very, very difficult. I've actually played this game. I discovered this game actually on MAME, and I believe I actually have some footage up here on the channel, one of my news videos or something. I had used it in the background. But you can see these gorgeous pseudo 3D backgrounds, and the idea here is that you can kind of move through time, so you'll fight in space, you'll fight during World War II, and you'll just sort of move through all these different settings. The art style is absolutely gorgeous. You can see that on this particular playthrough, I'm really struggling. I actually recommend playing this game with the PlayStation controller. I was able to do a little bit better with that. Again, my X-Arcade Gaming Fight Stick doesn't seem to do well with shmups. I mean, it's okay, it's serviceable. When I play this on MAME, I use a Hori arcade stick with an octagonal gate, and I'm able to do much better. Somehow I think the Japanese style gate on a joystick works better with these games. That having been said, this is definitely worth your time. This is, I think, one of the reasons why you pick up Taito Legends 2, is to have the experience of playing what is, I think, a real sleeper hit in the shmup genre. You know, we hear a lot about Cave, and of course their games are great, but this is one that I think is really, really incredible visually. It doesn't really cover any new ground in terms of play mechanics, but it doesn't need to. It is a fabulous, fabulous game. Next up we have Bust-A-Move Again, also from 1995, and believe it or not, this is a game that I had never played, and I discovered it in the process of playing this compilation, and it really, really is a fun puzzle game. I'm kind of shocked that I didn't stumble upon it sooner. The object here is that you launch these colored orbs, you try to stick the colored orbs together to create an explosion and drop as much of the play field down as possible before it sort of collapses on your little orb shooting machine. And it's a fun formula. I found it pretty challenging, and I actually noticed that, at least in this version of the game, if you fail a particular level, you'll come back and you'll actually have a little kind of helper line that allows you to sort of figure out the trajectory of the orbs a little bit better. And I actually found it was more fun to play with that than without it. Maybe that's just because I'm a new player to the series, but I kind of liked to plot the trajectory and take the more difficult shots. So this is certainly a game that surprised me. It is a game that I've heard of, but I just never spoke to me enough in what I read about it back in the day to actually pick it up and play it. So I'm definitely going to look for this on other platforms and try to follow up the series a little bit more and become better at it, because I just found, you know, time melting away as I went through the version here on Taito Legends 2. So no Taito compilation would be complete without a Space Invaders game, and there are a couple of them here on this disc, but this is Space Invaders 95, and I just thought this game kind of captured Space Invaders in a very fun way. It's so bright and colorful and has that, what I consider to be that classic Japanese arcade art style from the late 80s, early 90s. I mean, it just bursts off the screen with color, and beyond that, it's still the same game. And I was never a big Space Invaders fan as a kid. As a kid, the black on white screen, if a place actually had one of the original cabs, it just seemed antiquated. I grew up in the NES generation, and that to me was video gaming. Anything that looked worse than that, ignorantly perhaps, I just wasn't interested in at that time. And it's still not one of my favorite games. Here you can kind of choose what I guess are different Taito mascots. You've got the original plane plus a dog and what I guess might be an arch from a Japanese shrine and some other stuff. But yeah, it's a very, very refined version of that formula. I mean, it has bonus stages and, you know, really huge and interesting bosses. Here you have what I guess are sumo faces. So it's just a fun take on a classic, and it's so interesting, you know, to think that this game was the origin in a lot of respects for the great arcade gaming that I loved as a kid. And it's funny because I don't think, especially here in the States, that we hold Taito in any sort of reverence. But I think really, you know, we should, because without them, I think the entire decade of the 80s would have probably been pretty different. And it's so funny, there's an interesting story about Taito. They were founded by a Russian Jewish immigrant to Japanese-controlled China during World War II. He actually emigrated as part of the Fugu Plan, which, for complicated reasons, attempted to relocate persecuted European Jews to Japanese-controlled China, and then he eventually went to Tokyo and founded this company, founded Taito as a kind of a vending machine company, and you know, to think that they evolved and created this game is absolutely incredible. So I think this is again, maybe we need to, I think, rethink how we look at Taito, and you know, this game kind of got me thinking about that, and how at its heart, you know, again, not a Space Invaders fan, but you can see that it's a brilliantly simple concept, and this game just, or this version of the game, really dresses it up so nicely. Up next is Metal Black, which is a side-scrolling shooter, and I've included it here for a couple of reasons. One, it has a really, really cool sci-fi soundtrack, and you know, some pretty nice graphics for 1991, and I think in a lot of ways it is the predecessor to Darius. Just the enemy design and the kind of core gameplay is very, very similar to that. It's you know, there's nothing particularly special, but if you like Darius, we're going to take a look at a Darius game next. You know, this is, I think, a really, really good game to play, and to just kind of see the evolution of how Taito conceived of the side-scrolling shooter. You know, it's a basic sort of post-apocalyptic landscape, then you sort of move on to, you know, other kind of sci-fi settings, space and stuff like that. But you know, if I had seen this in '91, I would have been blown away, because I think the graphics are, for that time, really above and beyond anything that was out. I'm sure there are exceptions. Maybe what was that game on the Neo Geo? I think it wasn't Blazing Lasers, but it was a Neo Geo side-scrolling shooter with a similar name, and that was pretty good. But you know, I think just that creation of the sci-fi environment, the cool enemy designs, this was a pretty incredible game. So if you have the compilation, check it out. You may want to sort of move to the more well-known shooters, but this is definitely worth a playthrough. So now we come to G-Darius, and this is, you know, Darius is a great series, and this is a really nice version of that game. It's fast-paced, it's frenetic, and it really shows the evolution of those enemy designs we saw in Metal Black. I just find that you know, this game took the side-scrolling genre and, you know, gave it that awesome 3D treatment. We were able to play this. I remember renting this. I believe it was for the PlayStation. They had a version. It may not have been this. It may have been Darius Gaiden, but similar control scheme, and you can see these great enemies. I always love the enemies, you know, in Darius, because it, you know, a lot of them were fish, and so you had, you know, the scaly evil fish that also almost had an arachnoid quality to them, and that is definitely on display here. So this is a probably one of the major highlights if you are a shmup fan. And it's very, very challenging. I'm not great at side-scrolling shooters. I've always been better at vertical scrolling shooters for whatever reason. But terrific, bold sci-fi backgrounds, you know, lots of color, great enemies. I suspect that shmup fans will definitely put a lot of time into this when they pick up Taito Legends 2. So what are some of the downsides of this compilation? I've been praising it. It's, you know, talking about how interesting it is. Well, I mean, there are a couple things here. One is that while you can save your settings from game to game, there is really no save state functionality. So basically, you know, when you're done playing, you come back to it, you have to start over from scratch, which is, of course, the arcade experience, but it would have been nice just to save your progress. The other thing I noticed about it is that load times are pretty long, especially for a compilation game. Usually, and some of the other ones I've played, it's not this bad, and the PlayStation 2 typically has fairly respectable load time, so it's, when you're switching games, you're going to have to wait a good 30 seconds, 45 seconds to move from game to game, which can get a little annoying. But overall, it really is a terrific compilation game. You can really learn so much about Taito, and you get a chance to play a lot of these weird oddball arcade titles from what I consider to be not necessarily the heyday of arcades, but to me the late 80s and early 90s into the mid 90s were when you had a lot of fun and innovative games. And yeah, the arcades were kind of dying, but it was just interesting to see what Taito brought to the table at that time. So this game really has my highest recommendation. If you're a fan of retro compilations, and there have been a ton of them on the PS2, if you like those games, you'll like this. And if you're a fan of shmups, I think this is a must-have, because you get a lot of really oddball, but really, really excellent shmups all in one place. So I thank you as always for watching Game Escape, and I'll be back shortly with another video.